Nationalism and Revolution Around the World, 1910 to 1939. Well, good morning and good afternoon to all ya. Good evening if it's that time for you. But I've checked my analytics and most people watch this during the day. Most people not being too many. The general average is between 20 and 40. If we could bump that number up a little bit, I'd be so grateful. Because this is not why I'm doing this. I'm not doing this for views. I'm doing this so I can build a precedent. A context being everything precedent, because Context is Everything Media Network founder and CEO John Michael is reading a textbook cover to cover. And I'll tell you this about reading a textbook cover to cover. When you do something like that, you build a historical context. When you read an outdated history textbook from the year 2001, meaning that it's right before a certain event that happened in September of 2001, you have even more historical context, because this is before things changed in textbooks after that, because, you know, our interests change, and what we want to indoctrinate our children into changes as the cultural landscape goes. And if you don't believe that, get out. What I'm saying is, as culture changes, the powers that be will put different things in textbooks just so that children grow up thinking different things. History is written by the winners. Haven't we always believed that? All right, Nationalism and Revolution Around the World. This is a new chapter, and that was How I Talk. Please subscribe. Please. Please. I'm looking you in the eyes. Please subscribe. Please. Thank you. Struggle for change in Latin America. Setting the scene. The chapter is called Nationalism and Revolutions Around the World between 1910 and 1939. Section 1 of this chapter 29, page 772. I've read every single page, by the way. Struggle for change in Latin America. Now, struggle for change in Latin America, setting the scene. The winds of revolution swept through Mexico between 1910 and 1920. It's like a hurricane, said a peasant fighter in Marino Azula's novel, The Underdogs. Okay, Latin American accent. If you're in it, you're a leaf blown by the wind. I'll get into it. I'm going to really go for the accents. I want to learn how to do them. The Mexican Revolution unleashed radical forces. As the revolution spread, Indian peasants battled to end centuries of oppression and did win land, Native American Indians. A century after Miguel Hidalgo raised the cry of Dolores, the Mexican Revolution finally opened the door to social and economic reform. Just trying to do the accents. Just trying to do the accents, not trying to be rude. Just trying to have fun. Mexican Revolution. Give me a second. I gotta get sunglasses. Every chapter I wear a different pair of sunglasses to denote different sections in the chapter. Alright, well, thank you for being here. Please like and subscribe if you're still with me, because if you're still with me, that means that you liked hearing me ramble enough to stick around for 3 minutes. 3 minutes is enough. That's worth the subscribe, because remember, we get distracted very easily in this modern day. I personally use Instagram for a very long time every day, and that means that I have a short attention span. If I've held your attention for 3 minutes and 57 seconds, please subscribe. Please. Thank you. Thank you. The Mexican Revolution. New heading, hence the sunglasses. By 1910, the dictator Porfirio Diaz had ruled Mexico for almost 35 years. Winning re-election as president again and again, on the surface, Mexico enjoyed peace and economic growth. Diaz welcomed foreign investors who developed mines, built railroads, and drilled for oil. Sources of discontent. Prosperity benefited wealthy landowners, business people, and foreign investors. But most Mexicans were peasants who lived in desperate poverty. Without land or education, they had no hope of improving their situation. Discontent rippled through Mexico in the early 1900s. Factory workers and miners earning meager wages were restless and angry, and middle-class liberals who embraced democracy opposed the Diaz dictatorship. The battle begins. The unrest boiled over when Francisco Madero, a liberal reformer, demanded free elections in 1910. After being imprisoned by Diaz, he began to encourage revolt. Faced with rebellion in several parts of the country, Diaz resigned in 1911. Madero has unleashed a tiger. Now let us see if he can control it, declared the dictator as he left Mexico. Diaz's taunt proved well-founded. Madero became president of Mexico, but within 2 years, he was murdered. A complex upheaval. During the power struggle that followed, the several leaders emerged. Among them, Francisco Pancho Villa. Francisco Pancho Villa, a hard-riding rebel from the north. He fought mostly for personal power, but won the loyalty of his followers. In southern Mexico, Emiliano Zapata led a peasant revolt. Zapata himself, an Indian tenant farmer, understood the misery of peasant villagers. His followers were called Zapatistas. Fighting flared across Mexico for a decade, killing as many as 1 million people. Peasants, small farmers, ranchers, and urban workers were drawn into the violent struggle. Women soldiers called soldaderas, cooked, tended the wounded, and even fought alongside the men. Reformers in Mexico. New heading. No sunglasses. Please subscribe if you're still here. In 1917, voters elected Venustiano Carranza, a conservative president of Mexico. That year, Carranza reluctantly approved a new constitution with amendments. It is still in force today being 2001. The Constitution of 1917 addresses 3 major issues: land, religion, and labor. It permitted the breakup of large estates, placed restrictions on foreigners owning land, and allowed nationalization or government takeover of natural resources. Church land was made the property of the nation. The Constitution set a minimum wage and protected workers' rights to strike. Although the Constitution gave suffrage only to men, it did give women some protection. Women doing the same job as men were entitled to pay they were entitled to the same pay, women doing the same job as men. That's good. In response to women activists, Carranza also passed laws allowing married women to draw up contracts, take part in legal suits, and have equal authority with men in spending family funds. Social change. At first, the Constitution was just a set of goals to be achieved sometime in the future. But in the 1920s, as government finally restored order after years of civil war, it began to carry out reforms. The government helped some Indian communities regain lands that had been taken from them. It supported labor unions and launched a massive effort to combat illiteracy. Schools and libraries were set up. Dedicated teachers, often young women, worked for low pay. While they taught basic skills, they spread ideas of nationalism that began to bridge the gulf between the regions and Central American government. That began to bridge the gulf between regions and the central government. So unified lessons of national pride could have people. Mexico's pretty big. Over here in Mexico City, learning the same stuff as over here in a city that's over here in Mexico. Again, I'm reading a textbook because I don't know very much. I don't have a Mexican map in front of me, so I know Mexico City is like, if this is Mexico, right? Mexico City's like over here. I can't think of a city over here off the top of my head. Sorry. As the Revolutionary era ended, Mexico became the first Latin American nation to pursue real social and economic reforms for a majority of its people. The PRI. In 1929, government leaders organized what later became known as the Institutional Revolutionary Party, PRI. It has dominated Mexican politics ever since, the Institutional Revolutionary Party. Does it still dominate Mexican politics? This book was written in 2001. The PRI managed to accommodate all groups of Mexican society, including businesses and military leaders, peasants, and workers. It backed reform but suppressed opposition. In 1938, the government nationalized foreign oil holdings, part of a program to reduce foreign influence. Rising tides of nationalism. Rising tides of nationalism, new heading. Mexico's move to reclaim its oil fields from foreign investors reflected a growing spirit of nationalism in Latin America. This spirit focused in part on ending economic dependence on industrial powers, especially the United States. Economic nationalism. During the 1920s and 1930s, world events affected Latin American economies. After World War I, trade fell off with Europe. The Great Depression that struck the United States in 1929 spread around the world in the 1930s. Prices for Latin American exports plunged as demand dried up. At the same time, the cost of imported consumer goods rose. Price for consumer goods rose. A tide of economic nationalism, or emphasis on domestic control of economy, swept Latin American countries. They were determined to develop their own economies and end foreign economic control. Local entrepreneurs set up factories to produce goods. They urged their government to raise tariffs to protect new industries. Following Mexico's lead, some nations also nationalized resources or took over foreign-owned industries. The drive to create domestic industries had limited success. As in the past, the unequal distribution of wealth hampered economic development. Cultural nationalism. By the 1920s, Latin American writers, artists, and thinkers began to reject European influences. Instead, they took pride in their own culture, with its blend of Western and Indian traditions. In Mexico, cultural nationalism, or pride of one's own culture, was reflected in the revival of mural painting, a major art form of the Aztecs. In 1920s and 1930s, Diego Rivera, José Clemente Orozco, David Alfaro Siqueiros, and other muralists created magnificent works. On the walls of public buildings, they portrayed the struggle of Mexican people for liberty, first from Spanish and later from Diaz era. The murals have been a great source of national pride ever since, and last heading of our day today is the good neighbor policy. The good neighbor policy. And thank you for being here. Again, if you've made it this far, please like and subscribe. Thank you. During and after World War I, investments by the United States in the nations of Latin America soared, especially as British influence declined. The United States continued to play a role of international policeman, intervening to restore order when it felt the interests were threatened. America's interests were threatened, they would intervene. During the Mexican Revolution, the United States supported leaders who it thought would protect American interests. In 1914, it attacked the ports of Veracruz to punish Mexico for imprisoning several American sailors. It, meaning America, attacked Veracruz to punish Mexico for imprisoning several American sailors. In 1916, the United States invaded Mexico after Pancho Villa killed more than a dozen Americans in New Mexico. These actions stirred up anti-American feelings, which increased during the 1920s. In Nicaragua, Augusto Cesar Sandino led the guerrilla movement against the United States forces occupying his country. Many people in Latin America saw Sandino as a hero. In 1930s, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt took a new approach to Latin America and pledged to follow the policy of the good neighbor. Under the good neighbor policy, the United States withdrew troops stationed in Haiti and Nicaragua. It also lifted the Platt Amendment, which had limited Cuban independence. Thank you for listening. Have a good weekend. God bless. Goodbye. Bye-bye.